On my videos about Cardinal Kevin Farrell, I just wanted to make a point here that I am questioning his own public record about his statements regarding Father Maciel and Cardinal McCarrick, based on his statements that he makes in the media, and then based on other reports that, for example, the footnotes that we read in the McCarrick report. I'm not making an allegation that Cardinal Kevin Farrell is a bad man or has ever covered up or committed abuse or anything of the sort. But when the stakes are so high, guys, here, the stakes are high at this moment in time in the church as regards who gets to elect the next pope, as regards who pushes forward a candidate to be next pope, and questions need to be asked, the simple questions. When we look at these figures in the church that rise up so high and have so much power and so much influence, and yet should never have been in those positions. I'm sharing a photo. I never thought I'd share this photo, to be honest. So, that's me with Father Maciel. Me and Father Maciel, and I'm kind of covering up the other figures in that photo. Some photos you're proud to share, For example, me with Pope St. John Paul II, or when you get to meet him as he walks around, some photos you would proud, but then I wouldn't be that proud today to share a photo with Father Maciel, but it's just to highlight a point. I didn't just meet him once or twice during my short period in the Legion, and I wasn't ordained a priest like Father Cardinal Kevin Farrell was in the Legionaries of Christ. His complete formation was in the Legionaries of Christ since when he joined after leaving Certain Ireland, until he was ordained, and then afterwards he was, most of his formation was with the Legionaries of Christ. And this is just to highlight a point here, guys. When you're making public statements about, I left the Legionaries of Christ because of ideological differences, I only met Father Maciel once or twice. No, your whole spiritual formation was molded by this man. People don't realize how important spiritual fathers, spiritual leadership is in the church, not just in the church, in congregations. And we need men who are in union with God. This is really important. The church needs to learn the hard lessons. We need men who are at the unitive stage of their spiritual life to mentor, disciple us into union with God. And if you haven't gone through a process of discipleship in the spiritual life, how do we lead others? We look at the crisis in the church today. The crisis in the church today is we do not understand how to disciple people into the process of union with God. This is why we have a crisis in our seminaries, a crisis with priests today that spend their time doing so much pastoral work. Some of them get burnt out. They reinventing the liturgies, etc. Yada yada yada. Don't have union with God. Bishops who don't have union with God. Cardinal McCarrick didn't have union with God. Didn't arrive to that unitive stage of the spiritual life. How can you mentor somebody? How can you lead the largest archdiocese in the US? The archdiocese. And the priests under you, the seminarians, how can you be a spiritual father to them? This impacted our formation as Legionaries of Christ, big time. How Father Maciel discipled us in the spiritual life, in the famous Cartas de Nuestro Padre, his long talks about, people will remember this, in Rome, he used to come in there and he used to give these long talks, and we thought he was a living saint. We were sold a lie. A lie. You do not understand how it is to live for years and years and years knowing a lie. Cardinal Kevin says he didn't suspect anything. And I I believe him in the sense that many of us ex-legionaries of Christ discussed this, and many of us said the same thing. A lot of us didn't suspect anything. We weren't privileged to his double life. But the signs were there. I remember in 1993 in Rome, in the general direction, I was 20 years old and sitting right beside Father Maciel at dinner out in the garden of the general direction on Via Aurelia. And at the time, and this was the same in Dublin in 1991 when I was 18, and I was surprised how much food they flew in when Father Maciel visited Ireland in November 91. And, papayas and manchego cheeses and mangoes and stuff that I didn't know what is a papaya. I'd never heard of a papaya in my life until all this food being couriered in for Father Maciel, because it was a sign of love for Father Maciel, and he had his special apartments with carpet. None of us lived in the luxury that Father Maciel lived in, because this was a sign of respect for him. And me, in my simple mind, I really, like a child, really, I was that naive. I was thinking, yeah, I used to be reading like St. Francis of Assisi. He used to live a very poor life, and I was just holding up St. Francis, Father Maciel, St. Francis walking everywhere, Father Maciel with his Mercedes chauffeur-driven car, with his special food, with his special apartment. I mean, it was so obvious there in front of us that it was, we were just being sold a lie, And again, I am doing a reflection here at this pivotal moment in the church so that people understand you need to question. Who are your spiritual masters? Who are your spiritual masters? I remember another figure, and I won't mention his name, but like that, we thought this man was a saint and so forth. At least this man that I respected had the guts to write to me saying, I am not a saint. And I thank him for that, even though others thought that. But at least he had the guts to be truthful, saying that he wasn't. But you need to question, who are your spiritual masters? Who are these men that should be discipling people to union with God? They haven't experienced the unit of state. They haven't experienced that seventh mansion. They haven't experienced that illuminative stage of their spiritual life. They haven't had nuptial union with God. They haven't gone the mile. And able to say, I'm here. Come here to where Christ wants to bring you. Do people understand now the stakes here? And so when Cardinal Kevin, after he was made cardinal in 2016, said he only met Father Maciel once or twice. Really? You didn't just meet him once or twice. I didn't just meet him once or twice. I didn't have any close relationship, thankfully, with him. I was never in his apartment. I wasn't his secretary. I didn't have any close dealings. I was never one-on-one with him in a room or anything like that. It was always around others. So at least that's the situation with us. But we did meet him a good bit. Simple as. In Naples, in down near Amalfi, in Rome, Mecca in Mexico. It wasn't like he wasn't, he was there. And, when I met him for the first time back in 1991, he was sleeping with Norma, his latest lover, who he had a daughter with, who was also named Norma, I believe. Who then in 2008 was there with him as he was dying in Jacksonville in the US. Yeah, guys, we need men of God at this moment in the church. We need men of God. we need to understand the basics of the spiritual life in order to teach Catholics this way to union with God that so many doctors in the church have spoken about. Would you trust somebody who has gone through that spiritual formation under Father Maciel now to be the Camerlengo of the church, who has also, made statements about McCarrick? And again, we're just questioning here, guys. It's confusing. I'm just questioning the confusion. How do these figures arrive to those places? These men don't have union with God. McCarrick didn't have union with God. That Scottish cardinal that resigned during the last conclave, O'Brien, didn't have union with God. Cardinal Grower in Austria at the time didn't have union with God. And yet Father Maciel used to defend that guy who was later found out to be a paedophile. I can go on and on and on. These men want power, but are not willing to lay their lives down for Christ. The Farrell brothers are good men, so people understand. I'm not saying that these are bad men. They are Cardinal Kevin and his brother. They're good men, and many of the legionaries I was with were genuinely good men. The superiors, good people. I'm not here saying that they aren't, to paint a picture that is kind of false. The Legion was, for me, a positive environment. But wouldn't it have been even more positive if the founder was a living saint? Actually could teach us, could write like Teresa of Avila in her autobiography or in Las Moradas, to teach us the nuts and bolts of that struggle to union with God. And here saying, guys, here's a template I'm going to give you. Father Maciel couldn't do that. We were spiritually blinded. We were spiritually blind as seminarians to what could have been an amazing experience. Or imagine if we had St. Don Bosco leading us. This great confessor. Or St. Francis de Sales, or Padre Pio. Men that could actually speak about their experience to union with God and could teach us, real spiritual fathers. We need a pope now in the illuminative stage of the spiritual life. This is basics 101. How can we trust that Cardinal Kevin has the best interest of the church at hand? Maybe he's blindsided by his poor formation in the Legionaries of Christ. I speak from experience here. We lived in a sect. We were brainwashed. You understand here? And, just after, okay, you were ordained in there and you leave and you go off and work in diocese and so forth. How that formation impacts. I wouldn't do this video, to be honest, if the stakes weren't so high. I wouldn't bother because, to be honest, as other Legionaries of Christ says, well, I wouldn't accuse Cardinal Kevin for wanting to disassociate himself from Father Maciel. Of course, I understand. Who would want to play up their association with that man? Obviously. But guys, he now controls the interregnum, the church during this interregnum. He will have a pivotal say on who is the next pope. We need a man who has union with God in order so that his encyclicals, his magisterium builds on that. We need a saint. We need a saint. And when you looked at the CV of the last pope, his time as novice master in Argentina, his psychological treatments that he underwent, his trip to Europe to change the scenes and things, and then his return to Argentina, and then his frosty relationship with the Jesuits when he was a bishop. A lot of questions pop up. It's, the Jesuits celebrate him as a pope, but when he was a bishop, when you dig past in there, there's a lot of questions. Okay, hold on a second. And I'm sorry to question this, but if we don't ask these questions, these basic questions, we risk falling into the same problems over and over and over again. The church's one mission is to help us on this process to union with God, salvation of souls. There's no other institution in the world that can help us on this mission to save our souls, which is union with God. And this is a beautiful mission. And again, it took me years and years after leaving the legionaries to understand my spiritual life, to understand, well, what is happening here exactly? What does God want to happen here? Speaking to many people, many priests, and many of them said, Robert, your experience as a seminarian in the Legionaries of Christ wasn't normal. How many people have said that to me? That's not a normal experience for a man to go through in a seminary. Yeah, that's life. And maybe God is allowing this to teach us. Look, there's some things that Pope Francis did which I fully agree with, and I think some of his reforms were badly needed and long overdue. But again, we need somebody now, a saint, to lead the church in this moment. Anyway, God bless you, and pray for the church and pray for the next Pope. Take care.